Welcome to the Soyle podcast. I am Tom LC Shipp.
I'm Jack Gleason.
And I'm SK. Welcome back, Tom.
Yes, thank you. I was under the sea inside of a locked chest thanks to SK's latest attempt to murder me.
Okay, don't put this on me. Don't even begin to put your disappearance on me.
Classic denial.
I mean, you did try to kill him 5 times.
I was just minding my business, being king of the lions.
I did kill him in the last one.
I've noticed, Tom, that when we start, you drop your voice half an octave.
Do I?
You go into
those German ladies who are listening to us.
Yeah. You go into podcast mode. It's great.
I'm trying to sound appealing to all that one Irish girl that might be listening.
Yep. We're like, oh yeah, well, we're gonna get started. 3, 2, 1. Hi, I'm Tom.
Hello, ladies.
I'm a ship, that's my character.
Oh, you're dropping down so you can do the boing and do your horn.
So what the heck are we talking about today, you guys?
Yeah, it's SK. What are we talking about today?
I don't like how you introduced it.
I don't either, but you know what? We're rolling with it now. Are all stories just retellings of the same basic stories?
Thank you, Jack.
Question mark?
That's a perfect intro. Well, what do you guys think about that? Do you think that all stories really boil down to just a couple of different variations? And what are those variations?
Yes.
I know you do.
There are 2 of them.
Okay. No, let's hear it. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, what are the 2? What are the 2, Tom?
Instruction and expression.
Wow. Okay. I
You're
was
welcome.
not expecting that. Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't.
And I will not explain.
Good. Okay. Well,
I was expecting that. I was expecting succinct but not coherent. I think I know what you're getting at, though.
Just think about it.
But isn't every story, even if it is instructive, isn't it to express anyway? Doesn't it boil down to expression anyway?
Yeah.
But no, expression is instruction. This is vague.
Yeah. So maybe you should elaborate on this.
Thanks,
because.
Why don't you tell us a little more about that?
All right. Well, see, Star Wars has a bunch of moral instructions, but it's also George Lucas expressing his need for adventure. Yeah, okay, I got nothing.
Really? You just fucking...
I knew it. I know that there's a distinction, and I know that no one knows how to articulate it.
There we go.
I think expression is the basic, and then whether you choose to use it to instruct someone is just a slight variation.
Yeah.
I think that's the difference between the moral question versus the actual message. If I'm actually trying to tell you something, that's instruction. But if I'm just saying, hey, let's talk about it, that's a little bit more about expression.
I would argue that is still to an extent that's still some form of instruction, because essentially what you're doing is you're making people more aware of the complexity of a certain issue, right? So even though you have a moral question and don't provide an answer, you're still providing an instructional way of looking at looking at that issue, right? By exploring the different approaches to it and everything else.
So can it only be purely expressional if I don't tell anybody? If I just keep it to myself, is it purely expression? I wouldn't think so, because talking to yourself can be highly instructional.
I don't know if there's necessarily...
I think they're the same thing. I think Tom's talking out his ass.
Well, okay, fair enough. I'm glad that you feel that way, because I thought the same. I was like, I don't know if... Not necessarily that Tom was talking out of his ass, but just that I don't know if there's an actual distinction between those two things, because no matter what you do, no matter how you choose to express yourself, even if you're not even aware of how you're instructing people are still going to take something out of what you say.
See, Tom, I was expecting you to bring up the different momentum shifts. The rising action versus falling action versus rising again. The graph changes.
Right, baby's first story. Okay,
Yeah.
Yes. So basically all stories are mostly said to follow a similar pattern of a starting position, and then some conflict arises, creating a rising action where you have an antagonist face off with a protagonist until it reaches a climax. And while the protagonist seems at his or her or its or whatever pronouns, bleakest moment, suddenly they're able to overcome the challenge, or if it's tragedy, fail, and then you have the end state, the new equilibrium, the last state of the world, which is usually your moral message gets it across.
Oh, I like your use of troopy.
I came out with that, but I read it.
That really is baby's first story.
And I can already hear in the comments somebody going, actually, what about when you start in the middle of the story? Then it's not. And
That's just non-linear, idiot.
Yeah, here's the thing. The story itself is still following that pattern. It's just being told to you in a different way, but it's still ultimately following that. There's kind of like two different timelines you can think of within a story. One is like the actual order of events, and the other is the order in which they're told to you. Think of Memento. Memento still follows that path.
I was exactly going to bring up Memento.
Easy. See? There you go. We know what we're talking about.
It spirals around. So there's different ways you can configure this basic pattern, but it all kind of basically, Cinderella starts as the family slave.
Jesus Christ.
She finds a fairy godmother.
I don't know if they ever use the word slave in that, at least in the Disney version.
She's a slave. Come on.
It's
She's a family slave.
You can see it. It's
But yeah, she has a desire to go to the ball as she after meeting the fairy godmother who grants her wish. And then just as she gets everything she wanted, bam, there's a climax where all of her dreams are going to go away at midnight. All the magic's going to wear off. And then it turns out that the prince kept one of her slippers and brings it to her, and it's all okay. That kind of pattern of like equilibrium, conflict, resolution, new equilibrium seems to be that's the basic structure of stories mostly.
Okay.
I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, when we first brought up this topic, I was thinking about like a clickbaity article I read that was it was like a 1-page article, just pathetic.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like, oh, there's only 6 basic story structures, and then it was just 6 different graphs of rising action, falling action, and how many times it flip-flopped. It's like, oh, does the character start up high and then go down low and then come back up and then go back down low again? And I'm just thinking, yeah, what's your fucking point? Give me an example. Give me a good example. Fucking clickbait article. Movietips.com or wherever the fuck.
See, I thought you meant like the different like sort of shapes of like the movement of the story. Like the linear story or like the spiraling story where like you're getting closer and closer to something, but kind of restricted to a certain area, so you're kind of getting deeper. I don't remember the other like 2 or 3.
There's like a cluster one.
Yeah, there's a cluster one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you can rearrange the showing of the scenes, but you put them all right in the right order. It shows the same basic pattern.
Right.
So I guess the distinction we need to make is, are we talking about the actual telling, which is just basically the order, or are we talking about like plot structures?
Well, I think the plot structures are the things that are always the same. I think the telling is where people tend to play around with it the most, because there's not a lot you can really do with the structure itself before it doesn't feel like a story, right? If you get rid of the climax, I guess you kind of end up with I've never actually watched this, but what I'm imagining is the end of The Sopranos. Spoiler for those who haven't seen it. I've never even seen it, but I'm going to talk about it anyway.
It's been like 15 years.
Yeah, you're like waiting for like the episode to actually get into the meat of it, and then it just fucking stops, right? So I mean, I guess
I have seen The Sopranos. That's not exactly how it ends.
Okay, can you actually then elaborate on how it ends then? Because that would be.
Well, there is a climax in the episode. It's just what's the resolution? The main interpretation from my understanding is that it means, the no ending is business as usual. Gotcha. The story just continues on as it has in all the previous seasons.
There is no new equilibrium. It's the same
just
equilibrium. Yeah.
Right. It's kind of like the Star Wars universe, right? Where it never is like at a peaceful state. It's always, dark side versus light side.
I feel like we've resisted talking about Star Wars this whole time.
It's time to talk Star Wars.
And
it's time.
I don't know if it's time.
I think we could spend 30 minutes talking about Star Wars and not get into any of the underlying structure of it.
But yeah, no, I think new equilibrium is like the only one that you can really kind of cut off entirely. All the others, and we haven't actually mentioned what these are, but
we'll go ahead.
All the other like basic structural elements you can't really get rid of, although you can play with it and like pretend that they're not there, but they're still kind of there. Like say you want to get rid of desire. That's like a big one for the basic story structure, is the main character should have some desire that they're going after, right? It's something that they're going after that drives the plot. The plot is about them getting or not getting the thing that they're after. And if you get rid of that, somebody who isn't thinking about it structurally might say, oh, my character doesn't have a desire, they're just like meandering through life. But probably their choice of meandering, it kind of is their desire.
Yeah,
they're trying
their
to
desire
avoid...
is having no desire.
Exactly. So it's really hard to actually get rid of a lot of these other elements, because by choosing to like do the opposite of what you would think it is, you're still actually doing the thing structurally.
So then maybe looking at it this structurally is not the way to approach the different kinds of tellings. Maybe
Yeah.
we need to go a little bit higher. So maybe some
Right.
more basic plots,
Yeah.
not so much just what makes a plot or what makes a story.
Right.
What are the kinds
Right.
of stories that we go through?
Well, SK, I think you're probably the best equipped to talk about. The first one that comes to my mind is Hero's Journey.
So what can you say about hero's journey and the underlying structure, or not structure of stories? The what would you say?
The hero's journey in its most basic form is a fish out of water story. It is about any character in any place that goes to a new place in order to change to become the person they need to be, and then return to their previous life having been changed. And you can think of that as any coming of age story, any young adult transitioning to adulthood, the loss of innocence, whether depending
The
on
initiation.
right, depending on its darkness or its bleakness. Any story about like true irrevocable character change is usually wrapped up in the hero's journey in some way.
Oh, I was just wondering, would you say it's like the most popular form of the story? Because like looking at blockbuster films, it's all about heroes.
I think it's the easiest one to lean on, but the hero's journey gets a lot of flack for being very structural, having all these
Right.
goalposts to
Yeah, there's
cross.
a lot.
Yeah.
When you actually look at it.
To me, I think that it's more of a challenge than it is a detriment to use the hero's journey, because if you use a very standard hero's journey, it's still going to be a pretty decent story. It's just how well can you write. But taking the hero's journey and then manipulating it and changing the order of stages and maybe doing something where you change the continuity, like Memento, you can actually have something that's not recognizable as a hero's journey in the slightest, but is still, in its truest sense, a hero's journey. And I think that's kind of the fun of that particular story form, is that we recognize it right away in myth and sci-fi
Absolutely.
and fantasy. It's very easy to pick up on. But if you put it into a modern setting, you change up some of the roles, you switch things around, you make it not so obvious, and suddenly it's a very complex story. And people can't really pick up on why right away until they resonate with the change the character goes through.
I think it also has there's sort of an inherent genre within it. Like it really fits better for certain genres. Like adventure is kind of one.
And that encompasses like sci-fi.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's
If it's not like a
Sci-fi,
horror
fantasy,
sci-fi.
adventure, travel stories.
right. Because I was just trying to think of how would you do a hero's journey in like a horror movie, and I was thinking maybe The Quiet Place, but I don't know if that really fits the bill. It's not really hero's journey, I would say.
It's like they don't go out, but it comes to them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's sort of
yeah,
like
the
stuck at the
travel
beginning
part.
of the hero's journey.
Yeah, the transition part is kind of integral. The hero has to make conscious decisions,
Exactly.
and being thrust into position like a horror movie usually it's not super conscious. Whether they
Yeah.
choose to go back and deal with the monsters is another thing, but going
Right,
back
right.
to safety and then back into peril is not that super conscious decision
Right.
the hero needs
It
to
generally
make.
tends not to horror movies or stories, I would say, probably they're not really trying to force the character like to change. It's focused on like the most basic of desires, which is survival. It's pretty much every other story is on a higher level desire than survival. These are the desires you can actually focus on when the ones below them are actually met. So if you're surviving and that there's no risk, you can focus on love. But
Yeah, right. It would be
The
weird if
hierarchy of
they tried
needs.
to do. Yeah, it'd be weird if like you were watching A Quiet Place and they had like a subplot of like the kid's working on his artistic skills or something.
it would be kind of weird. Yeah, exactly.
If it's not related to survival.
right.
It falls outside of the genre expectation, the kind of horror drama story. Which, if it favored the drama side more, it might be able to pull it off. But the benefits you get out of horror are what you kind of have to highlight. So you want to drop the horror facade if you're really not going to use it.
Right, exactly.
And I think the interesting thing about horror is that a lot of times the characters die. And I've been mulling this over, trying to think about whether a hero's journey is really a hero's journey if it's tragic. Because I guess it is. It's just the third act doesn't really accomplish anything because the hero can't change or do anything, or they change too late,
Right.
and the world can't benefit from them. And I think that's an interesting way to use the hero's journey structure in a very classic way. and use it as sort of like exposition for an even bigger story, something long form like a TV series.
So you can have like the first episode is sort of like the horror thing that kind of
Yeah.
launches the rest of it.
I think something in the realm of like Game of Thrones with like Ned Stark.
Mm-hmm.
He's sort of on his own hero's journey, but his inability to change, his inability to give up on his loyalty is what causes his death, right?
Right. He kind of believes in the system as it exists and like honor
Right.
and all this stuff that like people are just going to use against him.
And I haven't taken the time to look at it and actually pick it apart and say it's a hero's journey or not, because he does have a travel element. He does leave his home to go to a place that he doesn't like being, to be a different person, and his inability to change kills him. I'm interested now to pick that apart and see if it is, but think about it as the inspiration for all the other characters. The entire Stark family is it's hugely motivating.
Activated. Yeah.
And then you kind of get a repeat. So now we are going to do some spoilers if anybody hasn't watched Game of Thrones. So they then kind of do the exact same thing with his eldest son, right? His eldest son goes, okay, now it's the time for me to like take up the mantle and take the North to war to avenge my father, and he has a whole hero's journey, and then he dies too. It's an interesting thing, and it's that's part of why the early seasons of Game of Thrones I think were so popular, is that they went against that. They were like, no, it's not enough to just be the hero. You actually have to change in a way that isn't necessarily heroic. If you're
I actually really like that that parallel we're getting now, because when you look at Ned, he was moral to a fault, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was everything we wanted a hero to be. He just didn't live in a world where that was going to get him anywhere. And then what's his son's name? Is it Rob?
Rob.
Rob's the oldest one. His downfall was that he went back on a deal with who was it?
With Walder Frey.
Walder Frey, right. So I think that that's interesting because he did what Ned wouldn't have done. He went the other way, and he broke his alliances in order to further the cause.
But not in a
but that wasn't
ways because of some, but it's for love, the niceties, things that we're used to seeing in stories. That it's like, oh, everybody's just okay with it because it's for a nice thing. And it's like in the real world, no.
And that's the strength of Game of Thrones in its earlier seasons, is that it shows that, being moral to a fault and being pragmatic to a fault are not the ways to live. It shows that the Starks are flawed deeply. And I like that parallel. I've always enjoyed Ned and Rob most of all. And I think that probably explains why.
And then, of course, they don't really understand that that's why it was good in the first few seasons. And so they totally changed gears in the other seasons. And that's why it started going downhill real quick. Because unfortunately, then you get Jon Snow, who also follows his hero's journey and has a whole actual journey and travel and all this stuff. He finds all the different things about the world. He
the wild man.
Yeah, he gets everything, right? He understands it all, and then he finally gets to the capital, and he's like, all right, I know the answer, and then he has to do the thing, and instead of the story kind of sticking to what it was trying to say, it said, okay, no, he's the hero, he's gonna do the thing, and then we're just gonna
do whatever.
Yeah,
we don't really know what Jon Snow's potential would have been.
At least
kind
until
of the saddest thing.
George finishes his books.
Yeah,
is he not done yet?
No.
He said he would be arrested. He could be arrested. Like the fans could arrest him if he hadn't finished it by now. And guess what? It's still the sixth one still hasn't finished. So
let's go arrest him. Let's do it.
Let's go get him.
Yeah.
We're coming, George.
Yeah, exactly. First Stephen King, then you.
Yeah.
We're on our way.
Oh God. Is that for the Dark Tower series?
Yes.
Yeah. Called it.
We went off on Stephen King about. Well, I lightly went off, but SK really went off.
Let's bring it back to the topic of like the theme
stories
of this podcast for writers. So like if you're a writer, you're either trying to like figure out the structures of stories so that you can make it your own, or you're trying to break away and become your own, like find your own voice and your own self in writing. So how does this relate to that kind of theme?
Well, I would say try to say it in your own way, right? But don't try to be so unique that you're like resistant to utilizing the things that exist, right? The
tried and true.
Right. Like understand that every story generally is going to follow the same basic format, at least in terms of the underlying story line of kind of that arc we were talking about, desire and all that. But you can experiment significantly with the order in which you tell it and how you tell it. That's what's called the designing principle. That is the thing where you get a lot of freedom to play around with it. And I think that's the unique way you tell your story. That's the thing you want to play with.
I would say in modern cinema, we can thank Quentin Tarantino for breaking linear continuity in
Mhm.
popular films. It's
Definitely,
it's
yeah.
very useful to be able to rely on precedent and to
Right.
have something like Pulp Fiction exist. I mean, the first couple times you watch it, you really don't know what it's about, but it's fucking fun to watch.
Yeah, the movie's so much fun. I just watched it recently.
It's like it really
Zed's
stands
dead,
out
baby.
too. It's like how do you how do you define that story and how it's like other stories?
Mhm.
Because
No,
it's so much.
I think a great one to really buckle down and analyze. Unfortunately, I haven't actually gotten a chance to do so yet. I've been thinking about it though. Off the top of my head, I would say that each individual story does follow the same structure. I don't think any of them are necessarily hero's journeys. Maybe the
Butch.
boxer, maybe his story is a hero's journey. Because he kind of is trying to get away, and then he and the guy who's trying to kill him get fucking
Yeah,
kidnapped
he
by
has to go to hell to change and
Right, exactly,
escape.
exactly. Yeah, and then he escapes. Zed's dead, baby.
That's dead, baby.
And so I think his is kind of the only hero's journey, but all the other ones are not necessarily hero's journey, but they definitely do still follow the structure of equilibrium, opponent, desire, crisis, climax, resolution, or new equilibrium, whatever you want to say, and revelation. They all follow it to some degree. Each character we're following has some desire they're working towards, and there's something that's standing against them or getting in the way of doing that. But to talk about what the actual meaning of that story is, I would actually have to really think about that before I could
dive back into it. One, I think what we're getting at here is that the hero's journey is sort of this grandiose character change study.
Yeah.
It's about transcendental heroes. It's about messiah figures, whether they're portrayed that way or not. That's sort of how the story is structured, and that's the common mythology. That's not a word. The common mythology underneath it.
It sounded like a word. You said it confidently enough.
I believed it when I said it. But I think intrinsically that what we're talking about is stories that are based on character change.
Yeah.
That's one of the big overarching basic story structures. And I think that we can maybe branch out from that and then talk about stories that are more about changing society and look at the basic value of that.
Yeah.
So, Tom, do you have any examples of story that might be about changing society as a whole rather than just about individual character change?
Well, yeah, you have utopian, dystopian films. For example, you got V for Vendetta. You got
that's actually a good example, though.
Yeah, okay. So that's about taking down a completely dystopian, violent government, so that you can establish a new order that is more just.
Well, I understand that that's kind of the desire line, right? Where I haven't seen that either, but I have seen something like Hunger Games and whatever else. I'm assuming it's somewhat similar in that way.
So V for Vendetta is like protagonist driven. It's
Yeah.
like the Hunger Games are kind of thrown into it,
But still, I mean, ultimately, it's still you're following a character who is undergoing a change. Their desire is to either survive within that society, or and then at a certain point, it becomes to change it because they can't survive in it.
Yeah, it does kind of become like that. The Hunger Games, you're right.
I think, but in the case of V for Vendetta, the overall message of the story is about dismantling tyranny.
I see.
I think that following these character change throughout the story keeps it interesting for us and keeps it personal and keeps it from being a historical documentary about something that never happened.
Right.
Whereas in and I've kind of come to this realization recently with my own writing that I think most heroes' journeys aren't really about heroes becoming good guys. It's more about heroes reestablishing equilibrium within the world. Mm-hmm. So they don't really better the world all that much, and they don't set it back in any particular way. They just kind of reestablish order. Because you can think of Lord of the Rings in sort of the same vein.
Yeah.
Frodo doesn't really fix any problem in the world aside from the recent uptick in race relations between the monster races and the more civilized races and Sauron's forces. They don't just go away. The orcs and all them, they don't just disappear.
Right.
They just go back to their kind of loosely defined treaties and peace situations.
Right. That relates to my idea that a lot of stories, or at least with antagonists, are about us as humans trying to solve the problem of evil. How do we come to terms that there are antagonists in the world and there are things that scare and want to eat us or kill us? So that's how do you, as a writer trying to write, I'm thinking about my story, and there's so many different possibilities that it could go, but then I'm thinking about this theme where it's is there only one way that it could go if it follows a structure that people will connect with and resonate with? And then I'm just want to focus on myself. How do I deal with the problem of evil? how do I come to terms with and face the challenges of the world?
Right.
I was just gonna tie this in real quick. Tom, what you're kind of getting at is that I'm sure somebody's seen this. Like, there's a progression chart about like 19th and 20th century novel writing, and it's about like the basic themes within it, and it's always man versus something.
Right.
Man versus
Yeah,
animal.
The 9 point like
Right.
Man versus nature, man versus himself.
Man versus
I don't know
God.
if man versus God.
And then there's man versus society, and
Yeah.
then I forget the progression exactly, but it's
the
it's
postmodern
those...
one is like man versus author, and like
right.
Fuck you, author. No, fuck you. I'll kill you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, if I was a fictional character, and I knew I was a fictional character, I might be a little pissed about that.
Exactly.
But I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is that progression
Enjoy
of
the show, pervert.
where mentally do I fall on this spectrum of what story am I trying to tell, and what am I trying to make peace with?
I think that might be kind of a weakness of the traditional hero's journey, in that it kind of, to what Tom said, it's really more about like, we're accepting that there is evil in the world and how do we overcome it. And usually the hero's journey isn't really interested in exploring the evil. The evil is just kind of represented as the evil thing, and maybe they'll say, oh, because I'm doing it because I want money, or whatever stupid fucking thing they have, or maybe it's super convoluted like in the Matrix, right? But ultimately it's kind of like, it's just the evil thing, and we're gonna overcome it in some way. It's more of a, how do you triumph over the thing, and there is something that is valuable in a story like that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that at all, saying the opposite at all. Tom, what you were kind of describing there with your own story is, I think, something that can be also very powerful, and it's not something you usually see in heroes' journeys, I don't think, which is, it's still about like, how do you overcome evil, but it's understanding that evil is within us. Evil is not a blanket term. There is no actual universal definition. It's just evil to who and under what circumstances. So
Right.
And so I think,
Are you asking the crocodile or the chicken the crocodile's eating?
yeah, exactly. And so I think that the more interesting stories for me personally, and Tom, what I hear you describing, which is sort of not what heroes' journeys tend to do, is they focus on how do you still see the evil necessarily as a person, so that you can overcome it, but not by beating it down because it's just evil, but by understanding why somebody would choose to act that way, and maybe offering a different solution, and understanding the nuances of that sort of situation in a realistic way.
Like a certain plot of a certain series of movies set in space about that a certain side, let's say the side of life, the life side, has the value that people can come back, that they can be redeemed, and to kill is part of the kind of like the darkness side, the death side.
Although that
I wonder what the story is.
Yeah. Those movies also tend to lump the only people who want to just kill are people who are already evil anyway, and so it doesn't really go into, what about when
clones don't count.
Entirely justified when you're killing somebody because it's for the greater good. How can the greater good be used for evil? Let's not get into that. No.
That's true. It doesn't really question all that war stuff. But anyway.
Yeah.
Well, before we move on, I wanted to bring up the Matrix again, because
okay.
I agree that for the most part, most on-the-nose heroes' journeys, the ones you can immediately identify, are usually myth-based, and they're usually black and white on the good and evil, or at least a couple of shades of gray. But for me,
just before we move on, I do want to say that I'm not knocking that in any way.
I
is a
understand.
lot of value for a story like that.
No, I understand.
Okay.
But I think as my viewing numbers on the Matrix trilogy goes up, the more I start to understand the third film, and I don't think that the argument of good versus evil holds up past the second one. We understand that Agent Smith is a very evil character, and his lust for death is very personal to his I want to stop being around humans. That's kind of his entire...
Humans are a virus.
That's his entire objective, is to eradicate humans so that he doesn't have to deal with them anymore. He doesn't even care if he dies. He just doesn't want to be around humans anymore.
And it's very ironic because in the next one he's like, humans are a virus, and then he literally becomes
a virus. But I think the more important value is not Neo versus Smith, it's the humans versus the machines. When you get to the sort of the climax of that story, you get to see the the leader of the machines, the Deus Ex Machina, the babyface machine thing, and it all it wants to do is survive independent of humans. But they realize that there's a synergy between them, and they broker that deal of let's find a way where we can both coexist. But you have to do this thing for me. And I think that after Smith kind of stops being the symbol of evil, there really isn't a good and bad side. And I think that's kind of the strength of that particular version of the hero's journey.
Mm-hmm. It sort of drops off and allows for that kind of shade of gray. Like, it initially is, like you said, humans versus machines, and kind of the evil of the machines is almost entirely represented by Smith. But then in the third one, you actually have that separation between Smith and the machines, so that the machines can be seen in maybe a slightly less evil way, and thus you can kind of get the triangle of like of opposition, where it's two of the sides, even though they don't like each other for most of it, they have to work together to defeat the third thing.
Yeah,
and
the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, but just before we move on,
no, I think that's a really cool observation. I want to hear more about that.
Me too.
I don't know if I want to give up the goat on this one, but my
give up the goat.
My interpretation of the hero's journey changes on like a monthly basis.
Sure.
And what the thing I think is the most interesting to me is that the last couple stages of the hero's journey are about being a master of two worlds and having freedom to live. And they seem very similar, but there's an important distinction between the two of them.
Yeah.
A hero who has mastery of two worlds means that they've kind of come to peace with who they were, how they've changed, and who they are now. And being free to live, hero is not afraid of death. A hero can be a master of two worlds, but still be flawed and be afraid of death. And to me, I think a hero can go through several hero's journeys. And I think that's kind of what Neo does in the Matrix trilogy.
I see.
Is that by the time he's facing Smith, he realizes that his own death is inevitable, but it's for the intrinsic purpose of maintaining all of humanity. And I think that's sort of him.
But I choose to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's his freedom. That's his freedom to live.
Right.
I can die now because I have no fear of death because I know that what I'm doing is correct.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what adds that level of maturity to the hero's journey, is that once we've seen it once and we can see where it's black and white, we can expand on it again and add another layer. And once you get to that third layer, you can start really getting into the nuances. And that's kind of what I'm planning on doing in my own story, is letting my hero go through this hero's journey several times.
Gotcha.
So it's like, it's about also not just like changing character, which is important in stories, but like the characters changing their desires and plans, like maturing as like their desires change.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah, what you'll find in pretty much any story that's longer than a commercial tends to. Well, I just mean because like you just don't have like time to really do anything besides the basic stuff in a commercial.
There's not the story real estate for it.
Yeah, exactly. But
It's hump day.
But pretty much every other story format is a bit longer and has the freedom to play with it a bit. And so usually what you'll have is like there's an initial desire, and then there is a new information that happens. Right? There's a new information that happens, and so the motivation changes, and sometimes the desire will change as well. And you can have a bunch of those throughout the story, and it makes it more and more and more complex. So that's why you can have something like where the main character in a dystopian type society can be like, I'm just trying to survive and get by day to day. That's all I want. And then maybe they're thrust into doing something that is even worse than what they already had, and so now they really are just like, I'm just trying to fucking survive. But over time, in trying to survive, new information comes to light, they learn new things, people recognize them as being somebody who can survive and do these other things and inspire people, and they kind of get built up over time and realize, okay, no, it's not just about me surviving, it's about like my family surviving, it's now about like my town surviving, it's about the whole world surviving. I have to so the motivation changes, and then the desire of what I'm trying to currently do, save X or infiltrate the capital or whatever, that then changes as well because of the changed motivation, because of the new information that this character now has.
There's a great example of how they do it in The Last of Us, in the first game and in the second game. It's amazing. I don't want to even give it away about how they change it. And it's like big changes, like the complete opposite, of their original desire. It's not just a different desire.
Yeah.
It's the opposite.
That game has been spoiled for me simply because I probably won't ever play it as much as it probably would appeal to me. I'm not going to get a PlayStation.
Yeah. I mean, I watched the second one on YouTube.
There you go.
I didn't
Easy.
even play it, so
Yeah, so I kind of already know, I think,
The
what you're
playthrough.
talking about there.
yeah, no commentary in Spanish sometimes.
Oh, well, there you go. That's why it hasn't been taken down, because nobody can understand it.
Damn.
No, they just put it up there. It's like a playthrough.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think I
so
know exactly what you're talking about.
So we have stories about character change. We have stories about people versus something else. What else are the basic elements of these other avenues of storytelling? What else would you
The
say?
self.
Yeah, the problem with the, like, thinking about your story as saying it's my character versus themselves is that that's what every story is. The character.
But just as in, like, the sense of self, as in you have a protagonist. That is the point of view, so you're following a person.
Right.
And it's about adapting to the world of uncertainty. Like, it's all the stories are going to be in a, like, that point of conflict, right? Like you said, that's like the point number one, that the protagonist is always going to be set up in conflict with something.
Right.
Usually autonomous, but can be just environment, just chaos universe. And
it absolutely can, but it should like still behave to a degree like a character in some way. Like it should have
So there's some kind of internal logic so that we can follow along.
right, or some way of challenging the character. Like I'm picturing I don't know if you guys have ever seen this movie, but it has Hugh Jackman in it. It's called The Fountain.
I don't think so.
That one is
yeah, I've seen it.
yeah,
we
that
watched it.
one's a little bit kind
I
of
remember that now.
artsy and stuff, and usually people go, "What does this mean?" So that's why I like it a lot. But part of that movie is about Hugh Jackman, like in a spaceship that is basically just a bubble of him with a single tree, and all he does is like meditate while he's like through space, and he like eats the bark off the tree, and like it's a fully contained, isolated ecosystem. The tree functions as a character in that, and he like yells at it and does different things, and though the tree doesn't ever do anything, it just sits there. The way that the camera lingers on it treats it like it's a character, and so when he yells at it and it looks at the tree and how it doesn't respond, it influences him to read into it and get something out of it. And so there is still kind of this dialogue of the wall talking to the wall, and
Right.
and him not getting anywhere, right? And so that it still functions as this this character, even though it's really just him fucking fighting himself and whatever he's dealing with internally. You still have this other character that he's interacting with in some way.
Sort of like Castaway, dialed up to 11.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great one that probably more people will have seen.
Well, there we go.
It's so you have the conflict, and whatever it's with the itself, himself, autonomous thing, or the environment.
Mhm.
Then there's also the relationships, where I feel are very important in stories, and I'm not really sure how to elaborate what they do in stories, but the relationships the protagonist has with the friends, allies, and how they interact with strangers, I feel like is so integral to the story too, for showing their personalities, and I'm not really sure why that's important in stories. But it
Oh,
is.
interesting. Okay, I know what you mean by the by ally characters. I'm not totally sure what you mean strangers. So let me just reiterate on the allies thing, and then I'm going to ask you about what you mean by the strangers. So allies in a story tend to help highlight the positive aspects of a character if they're doing something, they're trying to achieve some goal.
Oh, I have a response. Okay.
I
didn't have before, but when you said that
All right,
about
perfect.
yes.
So ally characters basically function as a way to, like, even though the character is trying to achieve something, right? And usually they're going to be doing something in the story that is kind of morally questionable in order to achieve it, because no human being is perfect. So there might be some things that they do that the audience might question, right? And go, oh, is this really the person that I want to be like rooting for? Why would I want somebody who's willing to do this to succeed? Why would I root for them? And so the ally characters kind of function as a way to have a conversation with somebody and showcase the positive traits of the main character, like why there's still good, why you should focus on like the humanity and the good qualities of this character, and that maybe they will change, because usually the ally character will be like, you have so much good in you, why can't you stop doing the thing that you're doing that's bad, right? And the character goes, man, I don't wanna, or they have some whatever justification, and then of course at the end they usually change for the better, and the ally characters are like, I'm so proud. So that's kind of what the ally characters serve. Their purpose is to kind of help guide the character in a different way than like an antagonist would, where the antagonist is going to attack their weaknesses in order to make them change. The ally is going to highlight their strengths and remind them of them in order to get them to change. So what do you mean by the stranger? I'm not sure.
Actually, when you said that I was trying to figure it out. And I feel like the protagonist's interaction with the stranger shows their like social morals about how they interact in society. It's that aspect of their personality. So like you have the conflict is how they deal with, conflict, and then you have relationships which show their good traits. Then you just have how they interact on like a daily basis.
I see.
What are their, and that reveals their like morals, their values, their codes, you know?
It's a reflection of their true character.
Right.
Right.
When they're not masked behind, who they are when they're interacting with X, Y, and Z.
And strangely, I feel like that's just as important as like the main conflict with the antagonist. I don't know. Just by showing the true self, like aspect of the character, like you said, SK.
Yeah, when the character interacts with society or with people that are not familiar with, because every person tailors their personality to their friends and individuals that they know. When a character interacts with a foreign entity, they reveal themselves as to who they really are.
Right.
All their facades can't work because they don't know what facades they need to build yet. So
right. I think of Doctor Who, when he goes on these adventures and introduces himself or herself now.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, actually, that's not a bad example.
This is how they want to be portrayed, like how Doctor wants to portray this type of personality, this is my identity. This is who I am because I need to do this. But it's weird because the Doctor uses disguises, but then with people who know they're the Doctor.
I think that's actually an interesting point, is whether they're cognizant of if they're trying to change their image or not.
Right.
Because if a hero is blindsided by strangers, they usually reveal who they really are.
Right.
But in the instance of the Doctor kind of portrays himself in a certain way.
Yeah, it tends to be consistent, at least across a single regeneration, and there are some traits that kind of carry over across those. And for those who've never seen Doctor Who, the Doctor changes their face every once in a while, and it's called regeneration. Anyways, so yeah, so there are some values that do carry over, but they definitely change pretty dramatically between them. But I think, in terms of how they interact with strangers and like showcasing like an inner truth about the character that's different from how they interact with the allies, and in Doctor Who's case that would be the companions, or the antagonists, and in Doctor Who's case that would be the monsters or whatever they're fighting that week. I think the interaction with strangers is only important if ultimately you're trying to, ultimately that scene is revealing something about the character that is still in line with what you're trying to say.
Yeah,
because
I remember what I was going to say now.
There you go. Go ahead.
It's in line with that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just as a sort of, to bring this back up to the writing element.
Yeah.
Every interaction between characters, every interaction between the main character and anything else has to be full of intention. And that to your point, that's exactly what you want to do, is that if you're going to have this character have this run-in with a stranger or a representation of society where they have to reveal themselves, it has to stress a point. What is the message the story's trying to tell, or what weakness or strength are we trying to highlight right now? Everything you do within the writing has to have a purpose.
Not
and
right
I think
when you're writing it, but definitely.
Not right away, but when it comes to the final draft, everything should support what you're trying to tell in some way.
Yes. It should come into a pattern at the end.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
The pattern should be shown in its full.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and a weaker, I hate to say that way, but I mean, just for the lack of a better term, a weaker author would say something along the lines of, well, interacting with this stranger, they gave money to this homeless person or whatever. Like, it showcases that they're a good person. Yes, but is your story about giving to poverty? Is it about their generosity and greed in some way? Is it about what they're holding on to? Does the action have something to do with what the overall story is talking about? And this kind of goes back to, Tom, what you were talking about with how you're trying to write your story of, what is the morality side of this mean to you and kind of exploring the different values within that within the story. That's what the interaction between the main character and like this stranger character should still do, is like highlight another avenue of the overall morality you're trying to explore.
Yeah, and it's hard to like explore it if you don't have the character yet
Right,
to
exactly.
explore it.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's where you have to work all sides against the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And you just have to find out what you like the most, or
Yeah.
what intrigues you the most, and then
Yep.
kind of mold everything else around that.
yeah, try to think about like if I was in this situation, what would I do, and have that as a starting point, and try to think about. But what would this character kind of look for? What do I feel like they would be trying to do?
I actually
Right.
think that's a touchstone we need to make a point of, is that when you're telling a story, no matter what basic structure you follow, no matter what genre you're piggybacking off of, the only thing that you're qualified to write about is your own life.
Yep.
So if you can do this kind of approach like Tom is doing, pick something that you understand yourself, whether you believe it's right or wrong doesn't really matter, but pick something from your own perspective that you can truly understand, and then twist it. Do something with it, and then make a point of it. But don't create this perfect character that doesn't exist, because that's not you, and inherently you can't understand them, and no one else will either. Or even worse, they won't like them because they're boring.
And I think that is a great point to bring up as well, because a lot of times what you'll have is the main character maybe is like super nuanced and like, oh, cool, because like the author chose to kind of model them after themselves to an extent, simply because that's all you can really do as an author. But then what will happen is they'll go up against like the bad guy, and like the bad guy is super one-dimensional because they just represent like everything that the author doesn't like. Or
Apocalypse.
Or they go, oh, racism's bad, I'm gonna make this person racist, and that's how they're the bad guy, right? And it's like, by making your other characters that shallow, really do a disservice to your main character, because now the main character has all these nuances about one way of being, and nothing else can ever challenge that. So your story isn't doing anything. So I think if you're going to write for like some sort of moral thing that you're trying to get into, and I actually kind of want this to be its own podcast episode in and of itself, because I think this is a really deep topic. But if you're going to write about a morality thing, and you have something in mind of like, oh, I kind of have an idea about this and I have an opinion on it, I would also say you should do more research into all the opposite opinions on that subject. So let's take racism, because that's like a really, I think, an easy one to be against. But it's like, if you can do the research and figure out why a human being would actually, what you would call racist, there's a lot of different reasons that people have for justifying their thoughts and opinions and everything. And so if you can actually find what those things are and then apply that to your story, it makes it so much stronger. You still have the racist person as the bad guy, or maybe they're even the protagonist and they're the ones who have to change, right? You can still have that, but it makes it so much more nuanced, and now the argument within the story is way more powerful because it's actually nuanced. You've actually like explored the reason somebody could be this way, and still you've been able to overcome that sort of thing, or your characters were able to overcome that thing.
I think the primary example of that would be like American History X.
Yeah, there you go.
Skinhead main character, but stops being a skinhead by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Well, I think in the overarching sense, again, we can leave the finer gritty details of this for another podcast, but being aware that your main character might be someone you really like, they might be you to a certain degree,
or idealized self of you.
They could be,
kind of thing.
Ideally they're not, but ideally they're not idealized. But adding complexity to the other characters and having them challenge that character is important. Having all characters challenge each other is important. But what the chief thing is that you're aware of your own hypocrisy. And if you can stay aware of that as you're writing and saying, well, I like this part because the bad guy gets what's coming to him and the good guy does the thing. And it's like, okay, but you have to realize that you're sacrificing a lot of nuance to do that. And is it worth it? And are you doing it to make yourself feel good, or because you think people are actually going to enjoy it?
Right.
You just have to keep remaining aware of that.
It's like we've been saying in pretty much every podcast episode ever. It's always about intention. And not just what you intend, but how the audience perceives your intention.
It's like, even as an introverted writer, you still can't avoid the judgment of people.
Oh, not if you want someone to read it.
Yeah.
Right.
If you're not writing for
Yeah.
yourself, you're writing for someone else, and that implies criticism.
I'm glad to be back here.
Yeah, we're glad to have you back, Tom.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I appreciate your input on the discussion.
We
Oh, that was a ship sound. Sorry.
you keep the ship moving.
Ship's gonna happen.
So let's just gloss over our points real quick.
All right.
We got character-driven stories, the epitome being the hero's journey. We have character versus society. That's a big one. I did want to throw in one more, and I think it's just worth mentioning, sort of in passing. I think that's the meta-analysis of storytelling. So parodies,
Yeah.
I think, is kind of the last tier. I think that's the postmodern approach of man versus author, but it's sort of like man versus audience.
Right.
Or author versus audience.
Right.
But having a story that actually critiques a genre or a pattern itself, I think, is an interesting. I want to say this not from my own experience, but just as a cautionary thing. I don't think that anyone can write a parody. I think you have to have a very deep understanding of the thing you're trying to spoof. I think people think of it as lowbrow because it's usually comedies, but I think you have to have the most in-depth understanding of something before you can even begin to parody.
You have to know the structure really well.
Yeah, it's just like when you're designing an antagonist and you're trying to actually attack that thing. If you don't have an in-depth understanding of why somebody's going to behave some way or what the reasoning behind believing a certain thing is, then it's just going to come off as a weak story. And it's the same thing for this. If you don't have an in-depth understanding of the thing that you are saying is bad, people aren't going to listen to you at all.
And to kind of tie it all back together, I think to a certain degree we can think of tragic heroes as being a parody of the original hero.
Yeah.
True.
So,
yeah.
I think if we're calling
it's like, your good tale, fuck that tale.
Yeah, if we're talking character change is like the most basic of all stories, then the parody of that is just the character who can't change and nothing gets benefited from it.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation.
We haven't really talked about the other kind of story, like the Odyssey, the Return Home, like Finding Nemo.
That's sort of still the hero's journey to an extent. It's the opposite direction, but also it's kind of the back half of the hero's journey, or the back.
Yeah, they might as well just call it the character change chart. But
I mean, that's what it is.
I know, it's a nicer name.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Okay, I think that we can wrap it up from there.
Yeah.
This is a lovely conversation.
It's good when you have lovely people to talk to.
Aw. You're lovely, SK. You're lovely, Gleason. Jack Gleason.
All right, man. You're ruining the moment.
All aboard the ship. Let's go.
Thanks, dog.
That's how we end the podcast now.
All right, boys. If you liked what you fucking heard, you better like, comment, and subscribe. I mean, gently press the like button because I don't want you to destroy your keyboard.
Yeah.
But obliterate it on every other occasion.
Hit that bell icon so you get notified about when the next podcast. Follow us on Twitter.
Fucking bright, yeah.
We love you.
Instagram, Twitter, wherever you troll, so you can keep in touch with us. And if you have some banger ideas, let us know. I want to hear it. I love to teach, even if I'm not that.
Shit on.
I love to shit on even more.
Yeah.
But I can.
What?
Swing them both into one thing.
That is a form of teaching. Yes.
It's just
all right.
Heavily opinionated.
Thanks
and
for joining
fade
us.
to black.
See you next time.
All right. Bye bye.
Woo.